Good afternoon, everybody. I have 1:30 on my computer, so we're going to get started. I know we'll still have people trickling in, so sorry for the repeat announcement, but just a reminder that this meeting is being recorded. And if you'd like live transcription, that's available in your Zoom toolbar by clicking the live transcript button. So thank you so much for joining us this afternoon for the Long Island Sound Sustainable and Resilient Communities third annual workshop. I am Sarah Powell. I am a Sustainable and Resilient Communities Extension Professional with New York Sea Grant. And we had a wonderful session this morning on our SRC Resilience Assistance programs that some of you may have joined us for. And in this afternoon's workshop session, we are going to be learning about new resilience tools that are being developed and used throughout coastal Long Island Sound. So to begin, I wanted to introduce the rest of our SRC team, as we call ourselves. I'm joined today by my New York and Connecticut Sea Grant colleagues, Elizabeth Hornstein, who covers Suffolk County out on Long Island, Sarah Schaefer-Brown, who covers Nassau County, Deb Abibu, who covers Western Connecticut, and Sarah Schechter, who covers Eastern Connecticut. I'm also delighted to announce that in January, we're going to have a new SRC on our team covering New York City. Ben Goldberg will be joining us to provide support to Bronx and Queens communities in the Long Island Sound watershed in New York City. So if we have any New York City folks on, he is going to be your dedicated point of contact soon. So that's just a quick overview about our team. Next, I wanted to go over just a quick couple of rules for this meeting today. We'd like everyone to please keep your phones and audio on mute and your cameras off while our speakers are presenting, just to help preserve bandwidth for everyone. We, as I said before, are recording this, and we are going to make the recording and slides available following the workshop. We ask that everyone please use the chat for any questions you might have. And finally, we are also going to be using some interactive polls today to gather feedback. If you've been with us for either this morning's session or past workshops, we're going to be using poll everywhere again. So let's get into that. We've got a couple opening poll questions just to engage with all of you and get a sense of who's here today. So you can participate in this poll by going to pollev.com /LIS tools to answer in an internet browser window. We're going to put this link in the chat. I think it's already there. Or if you'd like, you can participate via text on your phone by texting LIS tools, all one word, to 22333. If you're doing that via text, you need to wait a second until you get a message notifying that you've joined the session before you send in your answer, and make sure you don't click on the link that they text you back when it tells you that you've joined. But in either instance, phone or via your browser, once you've joined, you don't need to rejoin every time. The questions are going to automatically update as I advance through them. I see we're getting some responses. I see someone's having a problem for the web link. And let me know if it's not working for anyone else. Oh, I see lots of thumbs up. Uh-oh. We're going to have to do a little... I see some things happening in the chat. Oh no. Try the link that Sarah Schaefer-Brown just put in. My apologies if I gave you the wrong handle there. It looks like it might need to be LIS tools. Folks can try that. Maybe shoot me a thumbs up in the chat if that's working. I'd appreciate it. Okay, see some thumbs up. Great. Sorry about that. I do see we're getting some answers. I don't know. Some people say the new link is working and some people say it's not working. I'm going to try it on my end. Okay. What's a tool session without a little tool hiccup, everyone? I'm having success using the link I just stuck in the chat. I think other people, I think we're sorting it out. I see we're starting to get responses. Thanks for dealing with us. While we sort out the link problems, just did want to indicate this first question is about what sector best represents you, so we can get a sense of who all is on here. And while everyone gets in their answers out, I'll just want to note at the end of this session today, when you leave, you should get a feedback form that pops up in your browser window. And we'd be ever, so grateful if y'all could take a few moments to give us some feedback about your experience today. So, okay, with that, it looks like people now are in and it's working. We've got some federal and state government folks, a lot of local government people, nonprofits. Great. Looks like we have really a wide assortment of folks here today to learn about different resilience tools. Fantastic. All right, our next question for all of you is whether or not you have attended any of our other workshops or trainings. Or do we have some new folks where this is your first event with us? Great. Lots of folks, lots of repeat customers. Love to see that, but really excited to see some new people on as well. I'm going to give everybody a couple more seconds to get your texts or clicks in. And then next up, we've got a question about, we would like to know your familiarity with different resilience tools, be they federal, state, or local in nature. Are you using resilience tools, frequently to help with planning, occasionally, pretty rarely, if ever, or maybe that's using resilience tools isn't currently a part of your planning processes. But maybe it will be after today, after you learn about the new ones. Again, I'm going to give everybody a little bit of time to answer. Oh, and I can give I see someone how to sign in again. There's the link, Eric. And I'd say a resilience tool is anything that you would be using to help assess different environmental or climate impacts or to help with resilience planning that you or your community might need to do. Okay, fantastic. We do have one more quick poll for everyone to get a sense of whether or not any of you are familiar with the SRC team's Long Island Sound Resource Hub. We'd like to know if you've used it, if you've never heard of it, maybe you only use it occasionally. And if you have used our resource hub, we invite any of you to share in the chat your favorite features about it or how you have found success using it. Give everyone a couple more seconds to click in here. I feel like I should answer this poll. I would be a frequent user, but then I guess I'd be skewing the results. Okay, fantastic. Great, we've got some folks who haven't heard of it before, but hopefully after today will be more familiar. Wonderful. All right, so thank you so much for engaging in these opening polls. It's helpful to know, kind of our audience on the call today. And so for those of us, I know we have some folks joining us for the first time, or maybe you're not that familiar with Long Island Sound Study. It's a cooperative effort led by the Environmental Protection Agency in the states of New York and Connecticut, involving researchers, regulators, user groups, and other concerned organizations and individuals, all working together to help protect and improve the health of Long Island Sound. The work of the Long Island Sound Study is guided by a Comprehensive Conservation and Management Plan, or CCMP, as we like to say for brevity. And this CCMP is currently being revised, and a new plan is expected to be released this coming spring. But both in the old plan and the forthcoming revised plan, sustainable and resilient communities is one of the 4 goals in the plan, and that is the goal that our team works to advance. And so this SRC goal is to empower communities to plan for and respond to environmental challenges that are caused by a changing climate in ways that prioritize well-being for all. And so our team envisions work unfolding underneath this goal is stepwise. We want to increase knowledge by providing training and resources to decision makers. We want to encourage community-driven planning and ultimately support implementation of projects that are going to make communities more resilient to flooding and other environmental challenges. And as I mentioned before, one of the resources our team has created in support of this is our Long Island Sound Resilience Resource Hub. So I know we had some folks who aren't all that familiar with it. I do encourage you to go check it out. Via our resource hub, you can access a filtered selection of curated climate change tools and resources that are applicable to Long Island Sound communities. And we also have a funding database that is searchable to find funding for projects that you're looking to do. We have case studies and also a resilience planning guide that has a lot of helpful information to consider as you are thinking about planning for your resilience projects. So today we are going to be hearing about some new tools that are being developed, and we have an exciting lineup of speakers and feature tools. We're going to hear about a compound flood risk modeling tool, culvert tools, and a watershed model. We're going to be taking questions after each speaker, so we invite you to please put your questions into the chat. Our team is going to be taking note of them as we go, and we're going to do our best to get to as many as we can, and we'll follow up afterward as needed. So before I turn it over to our first speaker, Robin Glass with the U.S. Geological Survey, we want to know what tools, if any, you are currently using to evaluate flooding impacts in your community. So again, in Full Everywhere, this is a free response. If you have the name of a tool you're currently using, please share it, or maybe you're not using any, and that's okay too. But we wanted to see if anyone was using anything to evaluate flooding impacts. And we've put the instructions for joining the poll in the chat again for anyone new that has hopped on the meeting. So we'll give folks a second to answer. See some FEMA flood mapping tools, CircaMap, stories, okay, maybe being shared by community members, yeah, or others. The SLAM model. Okay. CP Eco, look for FEMA. For METS is a great acronym. Okay, we're not currently using any. Wonderful. Awesome, okay. As these answers continue to roll in, you should be able to continue sharing, but I am going to turn it over to Robin for her presentation.
What just happened to my windows?
Thank you, Sarah. So I should have control over these slides, right? I just want to, yeah. Okay, great. Hey everyone. Thanks for attending. Today I'm going to be sharing the accumulation of a massive amount of work that we've been doing over the past 3 years to look at kind of the multifaceted aspect of flooding. You know, flooding doesn't just come from one generating mechanism. It might be coming from heavy rainfall, overland runoff, but it could also be coming from the coast in the form of storm surge or wave action. It can also be coming up from the ground as a groundwater flooding or groundwater emergence. And so we've really kind of looked at all of these different flooding mechanisms together, and we've produced a mapper tool that is not yet public, but hopefully in the next couple of months it will be once all of our reports have gone through peer review. But I am excited to be able to kind of walk you through our tool today and give you a little bit of a preview on what you'll be seeing, what's going to be available to the public. This work has been funded by the Long Island Sound Study as well as the EPA. We've got coastal modelers, we've got data scientists, we have groundwater modelers, all coming together to produce this tool in a GIS format. So as I mentioned, flooding is multidimensional and multifaceted, and especially in the face of climate change, we need to be considering all of the flooding mechanisms that might be affecting the sound and watersheds contributing to the sound. And so kind of going around clockwise from the left, we've got what I might refer to as pluvial flooding. So you can think of that as flooding caused from rainfall. So this is not necessarily in stream channels. This is anything coming out of the sky onto the ground and running off and ponding or causing high water levels that might obstruct traffic, life, and property. The next type of flooding we deal with is the actual groundwater emergence. So this is not overland runoff that goes into the ground. This is actually the inverse of that, where we might have unconfined water tables that might be rising, and they start to engulf basements, drainage infrastructure. And when these levels get really shallow, that's when it starts to interfere with natural drainage and also kind of sewer drainage and things like that. Coastal storms, this might include, hurricanes, extratropical cyclones that might produce high waves or storm surge or both. Nuisance coastal flooding due to sea level rise, so that sunny day flooding that has been seen, especially down in the southeast of the United States. And then kind of putting it all together into a giant statistical analysis where we're actually looking at historical data and how often have these things tended to happen in the past in our area. So some of the project objectives are what are compound flood events? You know, I talked about it's really the co-occurrence of more than one flood driver at the same time, where you might have water coming from the sea and the sky, and those waters might touch and interact and create a higher level on your flood control than they would in isolation. So how has it occurred historically? How are they projected to change in the future? If we were to get hit by a compound flood event, let's say storm surge and heavy rainfall inland at the same time, where around Long Island Sound and Long Island, New York City, would that more likely be to occur due to the geography and the bathymetry of the sound? But really what I'm going to focus on today is the tool that we've produced. So we've got multiple papers and reports coming out that can kind of answer these questions, but the tool is a clickable, accessible way that you can look in your immediate area and you can look at the actual hazard of risk of these hazards happening. So how do we communicate these complexities, right? We're working in multiple dimensions now. So we're not going to just give the public 5 billion tables of values and expect them to understand what they mean and the nuance of those. So we've kind of decided on this mapping tool as a good way to communicate these results. And then thinking about how managers can use the results from the mapping tool to plan for more resilient communities. So there's really two parts of the mapping tool. So on the left, there's the actual compound flood mapper. So this is in general looking at, you know, the overall hazard and then the hazard from each of the individual drivers. And then we also have these story maps available that I'm going to walk you through as well that kind of go into, well, planning scenarios that you might need for boots on the ground type of planning. The domain for all of our mapping tools is what you see here. So it's the immediate drainage into the sound, including all of Long Island and the New York City, portions of New York City that are on Long Island as well. And all of our maps are aggregated to 900. It's about a 1 kilometer grid cell. So you can click on your 1 kilometer, 900 meter square cell, and you can get all kinds of hazard statistics for your immediate area. So you can look at the susceptibility to flash flooding in your 900 square meter. You can look at the susceptibility to coastal flooding, wave action, groundwater flooding, compound effects, as well as other things like future sea level rise scenarios. And that is listed in a supplemental map that I'll show you. The rainfall susceptibility mapper is not like a National Weather Service rainfall map that you would see in the weather. Instead, this is mostly a land cover analysis. So if our area were to be hit by a really strong storm, where would the water go? Where would it run off? And what portions of our study domain would be more susceptible to hazardous flooding? So some of the layers that went into this, again, it's mostly a land cover analysis for things like the ponding percentage. So we went through a high resolution digital elevation model, and we looked at kind of closed depressions as to where water will run off to and start to pond up. We looked at overall slope. We look at the density of drainage networks and proximity to those drainage networks. And then we look at something called curve number, which is actually the most important. And this has to do with infiltration capacity. So are there really tight clays? Is there impervious surface, for example? Is it highly urbanized where water would not be able to infiltrate into the ground and it would indeed run off over the surface and cause flooding? Additionally, we did consider some atmospheric variables based on the Atlas 14 data set as well as the PRISM data set, just to look across the study area and say, are there areas that tend to get more heavy rainfall? So you can see the 1 hour duration, we considered 1 hour duration and 24-hour duration storms. And the 100-year return period, those kind of more rare events. And you can see in the upper left-hand plot that it does tend to get heavier accumulation on the island itself over Connecticut. But if you're looking over the 30-year average in the green, on average, Connecticut's wetter, and that's a 30-year normal as opposed to a 1 hour intense duration event. So we kind of put all this together, and we used a really cool way to combine all of these layers to come up with a 1 through 5 score to look at the risk of rainfall running off over the land surface, which I'll show you in the tour of the tool in a minute. Additionally, we looked at coastal hazard, both wave and storm surge action, and these are some of the data that went into it. And the you can think of the 100-year or the 1% annual exceedance probability storm. So what should we expect on average 1% in any given year to be that high water level? And so we have that 900 square meter map available for that tool as well. So this is just the kind of data that went into this. The groundwater portion, again, on the same grid of 900 square meter. And there is a correction here that we originally had the spring water table altitude, but we are using a long-term average water table altitude based on our groundwater models, which are really nice groundwater models. In fact, Long Island is the birthplace of groundwater modeling, arguably, because we have this amazing aquifer and we have hundreds and hundreds of observation wells that we're able to aggregate, and we're able to use finite difference matrices to actually move water through the system in a process-based model. And what you're looking at here is the average depth to water across Long Island itself, but we also combined this with the Connecticut groundwater model to fill out our study domain. And so the groundwater hazard is based on the depth to water, as you see here on the map. The more shallow portions are where the water table is very close to the surface already on average, and these are average conditions, so the water table can fluctuate around these average values. Also, what went into the groundwater hazard map is the level of development, infiltration capacity, soil types, all again aggregated together into the same 900 square meter map that you can just click and you can get a number for your groundwater emergence hazard. There is the same approach being used for the hazard potential for a future condition on groundwater, and this simulates a 6-foot sea level rise and how that would propagate into the water table and what water tables are likely going to look at with sea level rise as well. And then comes the portion that I worked on, which is the multivariate statistical hazard. And this is really kind of put into the language of return period shifts. In other words, if you get 2 of these flood drivers happening at once, coastal storm surge and rainfall, 2 different types of water touching each other, what's the probability of those 2 things happening at once? And how much more time likely is it to occur in your area if we do model it versus if we just assume they're independent events? So if it's 6 times more likely, that's got a pretty high hazard for compound flooding. And that was all boiled down to a composite score of 1 through 5 as well, 5 being the highest hazard level and 1 being the lowest. What went into that score? It's the rain, the rainfall, the storm surge, and also the groundwater. So this combines all 3 in this composite score, and again boiled down to 1 to 5. And this is just the rubric I used to compute that 1 through 5 score that you see on the map. And so all of these components are in publication right now. They're in peer review. And as soon as we can get those approved by the Bureau, we can make the mapping tool public. So let me just take you into the mapper. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I'm going to replace current share, I guess. There we go. Okay. So here can you see the mapper? Yes. All right.
Yes.
Great. So this would be the home page when you get to the mapper, and we've got our overall combined compound flood hazard assessment, and then it breaks it down into its 3 components: the coastal, the rainfall, and the groundwater. And so if you can click into one of them. So this is our combined hazard assessment. You can zoom in and out pretty easily. And let's say you want to zoom into the Bridgeport area, and you're interested in, these are those 900 meter by 900 meter square domain cells, and you're interested in this particular area because you plan on developing there or you are considering protection for that area. Over on the left-hand side, you can get a breakdown of the compound flood hazard rating and where those numbers come from. So this has a pretty high compound flood hazard score in this particular model cell of 94%. And a hazard rating of 2.0. And broken down, what went into that is the coastal flood hazard was moderate. It was 3 out of 5. The rainfall hazard, again, the probability of water running off over the surface if it were hit by a heavy rainstorm is quite high. It's 4 out of 5. And the groundwater emergence hazard is extremely high. So this means that the water tables are very close to the surface. They're flashy enough to where they could pop up over the surface even and interfere with basements and drainage and things like that. And then down here, we've got this kind of information panel that kind of gives you the breakdown of what goes into that hazard score. So you can zoom out, you can pan all over your area. And if you want to go back to the overall assessment, what I really like how they all kind of pan and zoom together. That's for some reason really satisfying to me. And so you can kind of zoom in and out in the master view as well. Coming into the coastal hazard, so you can make your layers visible over here in the layer pane. So if you're interested in the wave rating or the coastal flood hazard, so we can make the coastal flood hazard visible. And we can zoom into some Bridgeport again, let's just say, to keep it consistent. And you want to go back to that same kind of area, or you want to check out another area near Bridgeport that you're interested in for protection or development or both, maybe some green infrastructure. You can look at how likely the coastal flood hazard is to occur. So this gives you those overall scores that we saw earlier, and then it breaks down the coastal flood hazard score. And it's a very, very high hazard in this area. So you can kind of navigate over here and you can kind of play with it and you can look at the wave rating. So the wave rating, you can click on a square. It's still in development, so we don't have any explanatory data for the wave rating, but this is really looking at the wave overtopping events and how likely those are to occur in your area. We have the AEPs, or the annual exceedance probability. So the 0.01, that's the 1% AEP, that corresponds to the 100-year coastal flood extent. So you can kind of make that visible and you can turn it on and off. And so obviously the red area, that's our current 100-year coastal flood extent map. So you can kind of make it invisible and visible. And it looks very similar to the current coast, but some places, if you zoom in, you can really see the difference, that those get completely inundated, this area as well. So we can go into the future. So we ran climate scenarios. So this one's particularly useful if you're interested in sea level rise and you're interested in kind of comparing it to current conditions. So we've got our current condition layer on. And again, this is the 100-year current coastal flood plain, if you want to call it a flood plain. It's not riverine, but it is coastal. And we can kind of go into the future here and we can make that visible. We can look at the future 100-year extent and we can turn those layers on and off to kind of see the difference. So there's the future and there's the current. So the future corresponds to the year 2050. So if you're interested in sea level rise and what the coastal storm, 100-year storm kind of floodplain is, you can compare the yellow to the red. Again, the red is current and the yellow obviously goes more inland because this is considering sea level rise in the model. We have other annual exceedance probabilities as well. So we have the future 10% AEP, which is the 10-year storm, the 0.25, and then the annual storm, the one that's going to happen on average once a year. So this one is in pink here. So yeah, these are just some of the capabilities that are going to be available in the mapper, the rainfall flood hazard mapper. I had a part to play in this as well, and you can kind of zoom right into your area and you can look at kind of the hazard risk We're kind of struggling with the terms hazard and risk right now, trying to stay away from the word risk unless it actually incorporates a probability. So this would be a flat kind of the flash flood hazard map where you can click cell by cell and you can get a breakdown of basically the propensity for water to run off over the land surface to pond and to cause damaging floods. So that's really, I see that Sarah popped back on, so I'm assuming that that would be just about time, and I can take any questions if you like.
Yeah, thanks, Robin. That was really fantastic, and we do have a couple of questions for you.
Great.
And I think if we can go back to Elizabeth's screen, we also do have another quick poll for everyone. Robin just went through a lot. It's a fantastic tool. There's a lot to it. And there are plans for additional outreach and training on this tool next year in 2025. So in just a second here, once we pull this poll question up, we want to know, if you would be interested in having more training on this tool and learning more about it, receiving more in-depth training. And if the answer is yes, please feel free to reach out to us. You can drop your email in the chat so we can make sure to keep you in the loop, or you could shoot us an email at any of our SRC emails, or if you'd like to reach us at a group, you can email lisresilience@gmail.com. So I'm going to give people a couple seconds to click over there. And then while we compile these questions for Robin, also be thinking about our next question, which is about, if there's any additional information you can think of that would be helpful for understanding flooding risks in your community, we'd love to hear that too. Okay, so lots of interest in learning more about this tool. Elizabeth, if you'll go to the next poll, and while folks are thinking about if there's any additional information that'd be helpful to you, you could put that in there. But in the meantime, I want to start getting to some questions for you, Robin. There was a question about, what is the expected timeline until this tool comes public?
Sure. So we have our reports, like I mentioned, in peer review. I know my multivariate report is one of the last ones to go through. So that's in colleague review right now. So we're hoping for Bureau approval within the next month or two. Once we get Bureau approval, then we can make the tool live. So we don't have to wait for publication from the journal or anything. We just need Bureau approval, which is like a more direct process. So we're hoping 2 months. But you know how these things go sometimes. So
Okay, no, that's great. There was another question about whether or not there are any plans to expand the model further up into riverine systems, or if the intent is to keep it coastal.
sure. So we decided to not include explicitly riverine systems in this. However, we are using drainage networks in the rainfall risk map. So in the land cover study, looking at runoff over the land surface, we do incorporate drainage channels, but actual riverine flooding is not included here. I just so happen to be working on a non-stationary flood frequency analysis for Long Island, which does not include Connecticut. And so that's just about finished, and we should be done by the end of the fiscal year, which would be next September. And that would be available in the Stream Stats app, which is publicly available. That's also a USGS mapping tool. And you can click on any watershed, gauged or ungaged, and you can get the 100-year flood, so to speak, the 1% AEP flood that has been treated for non-stationarity. The reason why Long Island's never been included in a riverine frequency study is because the data are so trendy. It's so heavily urbanized that you can't just fit it to a distribution. So we kind of treated the data so that it could be fit to a distribution, and that should be available this year.
Awesome, thank you. We're getting lots of great questions and comments here in the chat. We're probably going to run out of time to get to them all, but I see lots of interest in the tool. So like I said, we are noting all of these and can follow up as needed. And, at future trainings, I think we could get into some of these. But I did want to ask, or both a comment and a question. I think when you were showing the annual exceedance probability, Maggie noted it would be interesting to make that transparent so you could actually see what was being flooded. So just comment on that. And then a question about a little bit of confusion on the scoring. You were showing one of the grid cells had a score of 2, and the question is how was that derived when the subcategories were all like 4 or 5?
Yeah, okay, so I'll answer the first one first. I didn't have time to go into the story maps, and the story maps are really fun because you can move a slider back and forth, and you can see like what it was versus what it will be. I will make a note of the transparency because this tool is still in development, and I really appreciate that feedback. And I agree that that would be really useful to be able to see the coastal topography and then to overlay those inundation plains over it. In terms of the scoring, the overall score is when so all three of those scores are added up, and then the one you didn't see is the multivariate compound score that came from my analysis that just got updated last week. And so all four of those scores, 1 through 5, are added up, and then it's a percentile ranking is that final score. So it's probably because you didn't see the compound score, the multivariate score. But again, the tool is still in development, so I'm not going to. I was really excited that my boss let me give you a sneak peek of this today, actually, because I thought it was just going to be screenshots. So we are still developing it, but that's probably where that came from.
Okay, great. Awesome. Well, like I said, lots of great comments and questions in the chat. And Robin, if you're welcome to kind of address any of them in the chat, but we do want to go ahead and move on to our next speakers. So thank you again, Robin. Really
Thank
great.
you.
Our next speakers are going to be Enrico Nardone and Caitlin Matei. I hope I said your last name right, Caitlin, from CTUC Environmental Association. And they are going to be talking about a new culvert tool. And before I hand it over to them to get into their slides, they want to know how many of you have worked on culvert restoration projects before? Have you worked on them a lot? You've never done it? Maybe you've dabbled in culvert restoration? Let us know. Give everybody about 30 seconds to tune in or to answer and pull everywhere. And then I'm going to hand it over to you, Enrico. All right, Enrico, I'm going to turn it over to you. Oh, actually, nope. I'm sorry. We have one more question. I forgot. So it looked like only a couple of people were, masters of culvert projects or had done it at all. But for those of you that have worked on them, have any of your projects involved efforts for aquatic connectivity, like fish passage considerations? Okay. More yeses than nos, but not everyone. Thank you. All right, Enrico, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Enrico Nardone. I'm the director of the CTUC Environmental Association. We're a nonprofit that works across Long Island to conserve wildlife and the environment. I'm joined by my colleague Caitlin Matei, and we're going to introduce the new road stream crossing and tidal crossing prioritization tool developed in partnership with Long Island Nature Conservancy. I'm sorry, Nature Conservancy of New York, and our friends at Save the Sound. Katie's going to walk everybody through the tool, but I'm going to provide some background on culverts generally for folks who might not be familiar with why we care about road stream crossings, and especially their impacts on the environment. So rivers and streams are long linear features of a landscape that branch out and expand across our landscape, and then roads and streams and our transportation, roads and railroads and our transportation network generally. So it also does the same thing. And where these two systems meet, we have these we call road stream crossings. These are sort of 4 crossings where Vets Highway and Jericho Turnpike cross the Nissaquag River in northwestern Suffolk County. But if you zoom in and to sort of one of the branches of the Nissaquag here, you can see there's lots of these road stream crossings across the landscape. And as I said, they're long linear features, and in both cases, their primary role is transportation, whether it's moving cars or trains or people or water, sediments, and organisms. And the key issue for both is their connectivity. If they're not connected and intact, they don't perform their primary functions. So where water meets the road is where these road stream crossings are. They're either culverts or bridges that generally allow roads or railroads to pass over rivers, streams, tidal creeks, and wetlands. And the general problem is that if they're undersized, poorly designed, or failing, these structures can restrict water flow, lead to flooding and road closures, property damage, and also degrade natural systems and impair water quality. Is it a culvert or a bridge? It's a question that always confuses me. I've learned that there's sort of two key differences. One is the size, the span over the waterway. If it's more than 20 feet, it's generally considered a bridge, not a culvert. And another sort of key difference is that culverts generally have some soil or earth above them and between them and the road or the railroad that they're passing, whereas bridges don't do that. And in most cases, we're in the context of crossings that we're worried about. It's generally culverts. The bigger bridges tend not to be as problematic, but certainly can be in certain cases. The culverts come in many shapes and sizes. They can also have changes in altitude and change depth inside the culvert. Sometimes they restrict the flow of the stream and don't allow the stream to stretch out as far as and as wide as it might want to. In better culverts, there is room for both the stream to sort of expand and have some natural shoreline on the sides of it, all contained within the culvert. Ideally, our transportation system, our roads and our railroads, should not be put at risk by storms. And then the second thing is that these road stream crossings should not degrade the ecological health of and resiliency of our rivers and streams. So those are sort of the two key goals. The first, again, is the transportation issues, not impacting the connectivity of the transportation system. They're all at risk of failure when they're undersized and water overtops or goes around them and washes out the earth and structures around the culverts. It's a critical issue because of not just the transportation of people, but the transportation of services to people in the form of firefighters or emergency medical services. So it's a lot of risk for people when culverts and bridges fail. And in an era of increased and more frequent and more severe storms and increased coastal flooding, this is just a heightened problem in our region. On the ecological side, there's lots of impacts to the overall health of rivers and streams from undersized road stream crossings. The first is sort of we call perched culverts that are just above the level of the stream at their outlet, which causes a difficulty for wildlife in particular to move upstream. This is a picture of an alewife struggling to get up over a perched culvert. And in this particular site, the tide actually drops quite a bit lower than that, in which case the fish can't move past it at all. In other cases, undersized culverts, they increase the velocity and the turbulence of the water moving through them. So the stream sort of races through these structures where it gets squeezed and creates lots of, just the increased speed and turbulence creates difficulty for wildlife trying to move through. It also creates a scouring system as it exits the culvert, which then creates sometimes additional perching, which just makes the stream crossing more of a problem. Debris accumulation when culverts are undersized and get blocked on their upstream side can create flooding for upstream neighbors, can impact other infrastructure and create passage problems for sediments and wildlife. And then in some cases, culverts can be too big, especially when they have a hard bottom, like a concrete slab. They can actually allow the stream to stretch out too far and create shallow water conditions, which make passage difficult for wildlife. This is a site in Suffolk County where this has been tried to be addressed with some curb stops to sort of squeeze the stream back together again to add additional depth. So lots of problems at culverts for various reasons for wildlife. But generally, they disconnect rivers and streams. They fragment wildlife habitat. They disrupt the sediment movement downstream and the nutrient transport downstream. And they block wildlife, not just fish and aquatic wildlife, but also semi-aquatic wildlife like river otters or turtles, terrestrial wildlife that just can't move through because there's not enough room or there's too much turbulence or velocity. So the solution is a term we use is called right-sizing culverts, and creating culverts that are resilient to storm impacts, allow waterways and to act naturally, and promote healthy and resilient streams. Some quick examples before and afters from the Ausable Water Center up in the Adirondacks. This is a slightly perched culvert replaced with a nice sized bridge to allow the river to act naturally. Another very perched culvert replaced with an arched culvert. And this is the example in Suffolk County where I showed the alewife where it can't get past. This has been replaced with a nice wide box culvert to allow the stream to flow and pass river herring at all tidal stages. What has been done is an effort to find these undersized culverts, assess them pursuant to the NAC protocol, the North Atlantic Aquatic Connectivity Collaborative, and then sort of map them and rate them so people can identify where the problems are, and then provide lots of information about these culverts. The Nature Conservancy undertook an effort 6 or 7 years ago to sort of do this mapping effort in Suffolk County. CTUC expanded their work to Nassau County over the past few years, and Save the Sound is doing this work in Westchester. We have engaged a consultant called Civic Mapper to put all this information into a shared map that'll allow people to sort of find these undersized culverts, lots of information about them, and pursue projects to right-size them. So with that, I will turn it over to Katie so she can give you an overview of how the tool is going to work.
Okay, great. Thank you, Enrico.
Hmm.
Let me just share my screen. Okay. Can everybody see my screen? I have a map up there.
Yep, looks great.
Okay. All right, great. So this tool is still in the works. We're kind of in the final stages of it. Obviously, you could see we haven't been able to get the Westchester data in there yet, but when the tool is finalized, that information will be there, visible. So hopefully by early winter 2025, this will be available for people to check out. And it'll essentially look like this. So as you could see in the top right, we have kind of 3 tabs for people to check out. We have an About tab that just kind of explains the purpose of this map and then just kind of gives a little bit more information as to how the scoring method is done. We wanted to keep the map as cohesive as possible, so we just adapted what TNC had already done and incorporated that into Nassau County, and that will be done for Westchester County as well. There's also a Tables tab if you wanted to view the information in a spreadsheet-like format, and you could search the various variables that way as well. But specifically with the map, we have a search engine here on the left, where I'll go into this a little bit more in a second. On the right-hand side is the map layer and the legends. So you could see a variety of green and blue dots. The green dots represent tidal crossings. The blue dots represent non-tidal crossings. Well, I zoomed in a little bit more, but if I zoom out, you'll see this purple boundary. It's to represent the different counties. The white boundaries are to represent the different townships. And as you zoom in, as you already saw, it'll break it down even further. We'll get more reference data. So right now we're seeing different watershed boundaries, and you could zoom in even more. And as you could see here in the legend, you get a lot more reference data that you could assess while looking at this map. But to look specifically at the crossings, so like I said, the green dots are tidal, the blue dots are non-tidal, and the larger the dot and the lighter the color of the dot represents a greater impact or a greater benefit for those crossings to be updated. And then obviously the smaller the dot and the darker the color, the less of an impact upgrading that crossing would be. So just to show you further, you could click on these dots and it'll give you information about that specific crossing, what township it's in, what road it's on, even who owns that road, the estuary that it's associated with, and the stream. And then if you scroll down further, it'll give you this scoring method that we use from TNC. So each section is scored 1 through 5. The lowest scoring is could be a 4. The highest possible scoring you could get is a 20. And that's what we've been working with Civic Mapper on. They kind of collected all these data sets, and that was how we were able to come up with a scoring method. And because right now we're in Suffolk County, I can show you kind of this report card that they have come up for each culvert. And this is something that we plan on having for Nassau County when the map is finalized. We don't have it on the map right now, but once the map is done, every culvert will have something similar to this, kind of like a one sheet of that specific culvert, kind of just breaking down the scoring a little bit more further. And then if there's any photos associated with that site, there'll be photos on the second page. If you wanted more information specifically on the scoring method, right now, since this is a TNC scoring method, if you click on the project resource site here, it'll bring you to this box folder, and you could view all the various documents there as resources, and it even there's documents in there to show specifically how the tidal and the freshwater crossings were scored. But to go back to the map, let's just say I wanted to search for a large amount of culverts. That's what this section on the left is for. So right now it's broken up between tidal and non-tidal, but I believe once the map is finalized, that'll be the two of those things will be incorporated. So for just the purposes of this training, I'll just go into non-tidal crossings. And it'll give you these 3 options. So we could either search by municipality, we could search by estuary, or we could search by road jurisdiction based on whatever you're looking for. And it's easiest if you just focus on one thing at a time. So let's just say I want to search for non-tidal culverts in the town of Babylon. I would select the option that I want and click apply. And it should zoom in and highlight all of the culverts of interest of what I'm looking for. And it'll give you a list on the left of all the different culvert names. And if you were looking at one in particular, let's just say this one popped out to me, I would click on it and it would actually zoom in and further highlight the specific culvert. And you could use this. Yeah, that's pretty much it. So yeah, this is the toolkit that we have. And like I said, we're hoping to have this finalized soon. And it's just something that'll make it easier for those who want to do culvert restoration projects to find sites of priority. So yeah, if anybody has any questions, we'll accept whatever you have available.
Yeah, thanks, Caitlin. I do believe we've got again a couple of polls to put up. So while Elizabeth does that, I'll note we do have some questions coming in through the chat. So keep putting those questions through. And one moment, we're going to advance the slide to the next poll question, which is we would like to know how many folks, on this call today, would you use this toolkit or a toolkit like this one if you're not in New York to help locate priority sites for restoration work? Or is it not applicable to you? Great. And while those answers are coming in, I'm not going to click ahead yet. I'm going to give people time to keep clicking, but be thinking about the other question we have for everyone is if there's additional information you can think of that might be helpful for this toolkit. So I'm going to put that poll up here momentarily. It looks like people definitely would use this toolkit if it's applicable to them, or maybe they want to learn a little bit more. Or maybe they've got some things that they think might be helpful for the toolkit to include. So feel free to put that in as well. And then we'll turn to questions for Enrico and Caitlin. So, okay. First question is, are culverts on private property included in this tool?
Sometimes in places where we could acquire access to get to the culverts to conduct the assessments, they're included, but we weren't able to do that in all cases. So, and I'm sure that's true where TNC and Save the Sound are doing their assessments as well. I mean, I think that it'll be a work in progress. We will continue to pursue access to include as many culverts as possible.
Great. I think somewhat related to that, thinking about property ownership and who might own these culverts. Another question about whether or not you have assessed railroad culverts, and if so, had any success getting any problematic ones replaced.
I don't think I don't think they're included, and they're at least not in ours. We were not able to get access officially to from the Long Island Railroad to conduct assessments. So I'm not sure about Westchester and Suffolk, but I think it's the same.
Okay, great, thank you. And you may have touched on this earlier, but do you know a similar tool being developed for Connecticut?
There's not a tool being developed, but there is an idea being pursued to talk about developing one that's been talked about by the Nature Conservancy in Connecticut. They're certainly interested in expanding it across the north side of the Sound.
Awesome. Yeah, I see Michelle just put a comment in the chat about forwarding the results of the polls and to folks who are seeking funding for expansion of this to Connecticut. So very good. We will definitely make sure to share. Oh, and Deb noted, right, so yesterday was the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation's Long Island Sound Futures Fund award announcements, and there was funding announced to assess culverts in Connecticut with the Nature Conservancy. So maybe coming soon. It's exciting.
That's right. Yep.
Great. Okay, and then we do have a series of kind of questions, comments along the lines of considerations for when you're dealing with undersized culverts and maybe upsizing them so they accommodate larger storm flows, but what happens sort of downstream impacts of that? And I see a lot of conversation going on. So if you'd like to offer any kind of comments on the need to think about the upstream and downstream as being connected in a holistic way. I think that'd be great, but it is also something that Mike may touch on our next speaker, but we've got a couple minutes if you've got any thoughts you want to share on that, those considerations.
Well, I'm happy to turn that over to Mike. I mean, we haven't gotten far in actually pursuing culvert upgrades at CTUC yet, so it's something that I think Mike's the right guy to talk about the details of that.
Okay. Then let's go ahead and we will turn it over to Mike Jastrzemski. I hope I said your last name correctly, Mike. Thank you so much, Enrico and Caitlin. As Mike is with the Housatonic Valley Association, and as we just noted, is going to be continuing on this theme of considering culverts and road string crossings. So Mike, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Sarah. And yes, you nailed my name. Doesn't happen all the time. Thank you. And thanks to Enrico for giving a good primer on, what we're thinking about when we think about culverts. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we do in the Housatonic watershed as far as town scale road stream crossing management planning. And yeah, I think I just came across as Mike, but I'm Mike Jastrzemski. I'm the Watershed Conservation Director for HVA. Those of you who don't know HVA, we're the Watershed Conservation Group and Regional Land Trust that covers the 3-state Housatonic River watershed. So watershed starts up north of Pittsfield and brings in a swath of southern Berkshire County and slices of Columbia and Dutchess counties in New York State. and then another big swath of Litchfield County in Connecticut, and then a little bit of Fairfield County in Connecticut. So that's our region. And everything we do related to water, hold on. I'm not sure I have slide clicking capabilities. Let me go to here we go. Nope. Oh, here we go. So everything we do related to water at HVA is under this umbrella of clean, cold, and connected. So I skipped clean. So clean is the idea that pollution doesn't prevent communities, fish, and wildlife from thriving. Cold is the idea that communities, fish, and wildlife are prepared for climate change. And connected does double duty here. So first of all, this idea that fish and wildlife are able to move freely along rivers and streams, and obviously that's germane to the road stream crossing management work that we do. But also the idea that communities are living well with their streams, are connected with their streams, and that everyone has access to healthy waters regardless of their background or ability. So I'll talk a little bit about our road stream crossing assessment work over the years, going back to 2009, which, man, it's a long time ago. We started doing assessment work up in the Berkshires, and this was under the River and Stream Continuity uh, partnership that was out of UMass that ultimately evolved into the North Atlantic Aquatic Connectivity Collaborative that Enrico talked about. During that project, we assessed something like 500 structures up there, and we learned a lot through that project. And we took those lessons into the next phase. But that project was a regional prioritization. We ended up with two structures that really stood out as good places to work, and we replaced those, and we restored over 5 miles of eastern brook trout habitat, which is great. But the question we were asking when we were done with that is, what about the other 498 structures we looked at? Basically, like, what are we going to do with all this data, and why aren't people using it? So when we moved into the next project, which was in the Litchfield Hills, um, we were thinking, how do we move this assessment data towards action? Like, how do we make this data into actual projects? And what we realized was that we need to engage all of the key players in setting priorities together. And we need to have a system, a framework for providing technical assistance to get those projects done. And we need to have more resources for securing funding to get them done. So when we moved on to that project in the Litchfield Hills, which was 2012 to 2017, we assessed about 800 structures there. And we took those lessons that we learned from the Berkshires. So one of the things we heard the most from Berkshire communities was that we'd sort of started with this sub-watershed approach. And when we came in and said, hey, we want to work on this particular culvert or whatever, often we would hear, we have this other one that you didn't even look at because you were looking at a sub-watershed. So towns want a comprehensive inventory. They want to know about every structure that's in town. And also, we were very focused initially on conservation value, but flood risk and structure condition are really primary concerns. It's not like folks don't care about conservation value, but especially in these rural towns, they're worried about the bottom line. And these are big projects that are very expensive. So we need to come in with more information about why it benefits the bottom line for these folks. So during this Litchfield Hills project, we secured some additional funding to develop a town scale approach, which we ended up calling road stream crossing management planning. And also to get at that flood risk piece, we developed a new partnership with Yukon to do sort of a course model of flood risk that we could combine with local knowledge to start to get an understanding of that. So the town scale management planning process, what are we trying to do? So the biggest thing is combining this modeling that we're doing through the NAC assessments and also the work that we did with Yukon to understand flood risk with local knowledge. And what we've discovered, and I don't know, I'm sure everybody knows this already, it's kind of obvious, but having conversations over a map with all this information with folks that have been working on these structures for years will yield the best projects. The folks in these towns know exactly where their issues are. So that's one of the things that we wanted to do. And that goes into the second bullet here, which is, work collaboratively to identify the most important replacement projects. We also, with this road stream crossing management planning process, want to increase capacity. And this says town capacity, but it's really everybody's capacity to replace problem culverts. So it's providing technical skills to folks from the town, but it's also creating a resource for financing. It's pulling other partners in. It's really just identifying these priorities that everybody can gather around and creating tools that we can use to secure the resources we need to get them done. And then the other really critical thing that we wanted to do is build strong relationships with these communities because that's honestly at the end of the day, it's those relationships that lead to these projects getting completed. So just to go through the process here, it starts with the comprehensive field assessment, and we use the NAC protocol that Enrico was talking about. That's step one. And then also in the field, we're collecting some additional information to support a flood risk analysis. It's fairly coarse, but it gives us something to hang our hat on when we want to talk about flood risk. From all that information, we create a road stream crossing inventory, and that is the basis for conversations with the community and with other partners to set those priorities, to understand, okay, based on what we learned through our assessments, through our modeling, and what you know from managing these structures for years, where are the best places for us to work? Where are we going to sort of hit the three legs of the stool, which are conservation value, so barrier status of a structure, where's it located in the landscape? Is it going to open up habitat? What's the condition? Is it something you need to replace? And then is it a flood risk? So we're trying to find those projects that are really hitting on all cylinders. And those conversations are essential to really finding the best projects. And then through those conversations, we choose a few structures, so, 1 to 3 structures, let's call it that, in each community, where we do demonstration design development and we use the stream simulation design protocol to get those together. The idea there is that we're thinking about the stream before we think about the road. So, what does the stream want to look like? How do we design this structure to accommodate that? And that's not necessarily something that communities are thinking about all the time. So, providing a demonstration design that shows how those design protocols can work for them. Because it's not just conservation value for stream simulation, it's also setting it up to be more resilient to floods and ultimately be less of a management burden for the town. And then with all those pieces, we've got the inventory documents, we've got the flood risk analysis that's also in there, the demonstration design, all that goes into a draft management plan, and then that goes out to comment for the community, so staff and officials, but also, we encourage some public comment as well. And then once that's finalized, we encourage the community to adopt it officially. Ideally, that's part of the town's hazard mitigation planning, simply because if there's a big flood and FEMA comes to town, that's what they're going to look at. That's manifested in a few different ways in different towns. Some of these plans have been adopted sort of individually. Some of these plans have been adopted as, parts of sort of infrastructure management plans, but being a part of the hazard mitigation plan is ideal, and that's what we encourage, and that's what's happened mostly. So where are we at now? We've completed 24 of these, which is, I don't know, even saying that number is crazy. It's a lot. We've got 9 in Massachusetts, 3 in New York, 10 in Connecticut, and then we have 6 in progress in the Naugatuck Valley. And shout out to our partners at Save the Sound. We're working on 3 of those with them. And what's the upshot? So we've got a lot of really good projects coming out of these plans. So in Mass, we've got 2 projects done, 4 in the permitting phase, 1 in the data collection phase. In Connecticut, we've got 2 completed, 6 in the permitting phase, and 5 in the data collection phase. And then in New York, which is a smaller slice of the watershed, 1 completed and 1 in the data collection phase. So, the idea here is these plans are yielding projects, and the plans themselves are helping us to get the resources we need to get the projects done. So there's sort of proof in the pudding here with this approach. Spending the time with these municipalities and understanding what their concerns are, understanding what their needs are, in our experience, I guess, is pretty essential to really moving the needle in getting these projects done. And there are thousands of these kinds of projects that need to get done across our watershed. And I don't know. This is the approach that we've developed to try to get these conversations going and get the resources in and get them done. I think that's it. Okay. So yeah, this is my contact information. If anybody's interested in our approach, I'm happy to talk more and also happy to take questions.
Yeah, thanks so much, Mike. I would encourage folks to put their questions into the chat. I actually have one for you.
Sure.
While folks might be also populating the chat with questions. That was really fascinating, and I appreciated your comment on the need to build relationships with those municipalities. So I guess my question is sort of twofold. I'm wondering if, do you think that like pre management plan creation relationship building is necessary with them, or are you really engaging with those municipalities and communities for the first time as you're going through that management plan process that you laid out?
So these plans are grant funded generally. So even in the process of finding that funding and, trying to secure that funding, we're starting the relationship then. So I think you're right. I think it's conversations before we even start doing any of the work is very important.
Gotcha.
HVA as an organization, we have a really good relationship with a lot of the municipalities where we've done this work. So it's sort of started there. But yeah, I guess there's a couple ways you could slice it. You could say, well, we really want to work here, so let's have those conversations. Um, or you could say, like, there's this funding opportunity that's applicable to this place, and then you could talk to them there. I don't know. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, I definitely think it does. And I just have one follow-up before I go to the question from Shauna in the chat. But I was curious about, you kind of laid out the management plan process and all the steps, but could you talk about like the time scale of how long? Like I know you said that, I believe you said at the outset this work had started in 2009, is that right? And you've completed 24, but like if you're just looking at one plan, like generally speaking, how
What,
long?
sure, yeah. And I was laying out like sort of HVA's history of road screen crossing assessment, which has been going on for a while. But if we were to start a management plan now, I mean, I think we would be able to bang it out in a year and a half, 2 years, something like that. It sort of depends on how many structures there are. I mean, that is the bulk of the time is going out and doing the assessments.
Great.
And I would invite, I think Paul and Anthony are on the call. They could chime in there. They've been working on some of these.
Sure. And while they might be thinking or typing, there's a question in the chat about the prioritization and whether or not that takes into account preferences by the community to target specific, problematic culverts, maybe.
Of course.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a short answer, but I think we have to, when we're going into these communities, understand what their priorities are and align them the best we can with what our priorities are. And there's a lot of overlap, you know. Ideally, there's like perfect overlap. It's not always like that, but we're not going to be able to do anything if we go in there and say like, well, we want to work on this, but you want to work on that, so we're going to work on this. Like that just doesn't work.
Follow up on that is sort of how, so if you've got a ranking or
It's not mathematical at all.
Okay.
It's very subjective. We do we have a rubric for structure prioritization for each of these plans that incorporates conservation value, um, flood risk, and um, maintenance need. But ultimately, when we're really settling on the priorities we're going to work on right now, I mean, that's very subjective.
Yeah, I see Paul chiming in to talk about how the assessment is specific to crossings, but discussions, so getting back to that priority question. Okay, great. Another question, and I appreciated what you said during your presentation about thinking about the stream before thinking about the road. Question from Judy about whether or not there have been instances where the road might have been realigned or changed to actually accommodate better stream flow, or has there been any resistance to thinking about the stream before the road? Any resistance to that?
So where we've put in these projects that use stream simulation design, and I know Paul's on here, so I'd be better talking about this than I am. But the proof is in the pudding. I think I already said that once. Apologize for using that twice. But these structures work, right? Like the idea is that if we design the road and the crossing to accommodate the stream, we're going to have less flood damage, less maintenance. So yeah, I mean, and we've been able to bring that message to these communities. So there's been a lot of support for it.
I guess I'll chime in because you threw my name out there more than once,
Sorry,
Mike.
Paul.
I can't. Let me put it this way: the few redesigns I've been involved with, they did involve shifting the road slightly, but it wasn't out of like a major necessity of either the road or the stream, to be honest. I think the there's not a whole lot of resistance to this as long as it doesn't totally disrupt the traffic flow and the function that the road was designed to, attain a certain traffic level. The thinking about the stream first is definitely foreign to anybody that's working in DPWs or highway crews or whatever. They look at a pipe as just to convey the water, but really a stream has four flows. It's water, it's sediment, it's woody material, and then it's aquatic organisms in both directions. And if your pipe only is designed for water, then you're probably impeding those other three flows, and that's creating problems that either habitat related or structural and ultimately resilience related. So I think the NAC protocol is really getting at a lot of those important factors. And then, so to Shauna's point, it's not mathematical. The NAC process is mathematical. The discussions with the towns are definitely not, and very colloquial and very face-to-face and like, hey, what about this road crossing? And they're like, oh yeah, that blew out in such and such event. And so it becomes a priority or it gets added or upped in priority in our planning process. So
Yeah, and I would say that's one of the benefits of working at the town scale. There's all this local knowledge that is, it's in people's heads, and we're incorporating it into a plan. And if we weren't doing that work, it might go away, right? Like, that it's really important information for us to gather. Just as important as all the modeling and stuff that we're doing.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you both, Paul and Mike. Okay. And if there are I know we've got a couple comments and sort of ongoing discussions in the chat, which is fantastic. Keep it going. Glad to see people are, learning some new information here. But if there's no other questions, I think I'm going to go ahead and turn it to our final speaker for the day and just say thank you one more time, Mike. Really
Thanks,
appreciate
everybody.
your presentation. But I'm going to turn it over to Kathleen Knight with the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, or CTD, and she's going to be talking about the Connecticut watershed model. So, Kate, I'm going to turn it to you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to bring my screen up and try to make sure I'm in the right presenter mode. And is that working for everyone?
Yep, it looks great.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you to the whole SRC team for inviting us back to present the update of the Connecticut watershed model, and to all of you here who took the time out to let us present this to you. We're really excited to move this forward. This is kind of the foundation of a lot of collaborative work we have planned in the future, and a foundation for how we're going to approach modeling for a variety, like a larger framework than just this model. And that said, we're grateful for your participation, and hopefully you want to join us in some future adventures, which we'll talk about later. We've nicknamed the model CTWIM. I'll say that up front because I accidentally will use that acronym all the time. So you know what I'm talking about. So before I get into the nitty gritty, I thought I'd kind of touch base on why CTWIM. I start off right away with it. As you know, probably, Connecticut and New York, but we're going to focus on Connecticut today, have long history of trying to reduce nitrogen loads to the sound to fight hypoxia. And one of those planning documents is Connecticut's second generation nitrogen strategy. Some of the topic areas for approaching these reductions that strategy included is wastewater treatment plants, non-point source, which is what the NPS stands for, if you're unfamiliar, including stormwater and other ones, and enhanced efforts in that area, and then a focus on embayments. So this is from the IRT, which is the indicators review team of the Long Island Sound Study, and some of their tracking to make sure we're on our goals as Long Island Sound Study. And those are live links. So when you get this later, you can go and dig into that data a little further. But we have seen some progress in wastewater treatment plants, which is great. And that's kind of evident that we're seeing in the open sound hypoxia as well. But we have further work to do, right? Not only where we can get it from wastewater treatment plants, but we've seen little progress with regards to non-point sources where we need to be at least. And then we really need to refine our focus in how we approach the embayments. So this model is meant to help guide that decision-making process. So the last time we presented, which was the first annual workshop, we were doing a lightning round. So you may have seen this slide if you were with us then, but at that moment, we had just wrapped up the modeling plan and the QAP, the Quality Assurance Project Plan, and we were just beginning the data collection for the development. So you can see we've made a lot of progress since then, and we're really grateful to everyone who may have contributed who's also on this call. We are at this point of wrapping up the development. We are starting to review those results as they come in from the contractors, and then looking at, last year we did an internal training, so the inside team is trained up on this model, and we're starting to be on the cusp of the model implementation, turning those modeled water quality benefits into real world water quality benefits through an outreach program, which is more of a co-creation program, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. So as I said, I kind of wanted to dive into a little bit more details. This is kind of the crux and the overview of where I thought I could bring some of that information to you today. Give you a little bit more background on the planning and monitoring to set that background, and I'm sure not all of us were here today as we saw in the poll earlier last time. Give you a little more information on what the CTWIM development looked like since then and where we're at now. A couple of sneak peek results. We're just starting to get updates from the contractor on those final calibrations. So we just have a few of those, and don't hold me to those in case when we review them, we may ask for some further edits. And then kind of talk you through the bigger vision, right? Our current status of where, although it's evolving, I will say, how we're going to do this model linking program, how we use the Pawcatuck example that was funded under a SNEP program to inform that process, and what that looks like for a statewide kind of modeling process and framework, and then what these co-creation workshops will look like roughly, but we're still gaining input from people we are lucky enough to talk to, and how that will inform our process and how we hope it's useful for you as well. So before we could even approach those plans and QAPs, we really needed to decide on our objectives. Like I said, we wanted to reduce our nitrogen load to the sound. So we need something statewide, right? Something regional, something that's representative in that way. But we also want this scalable to a very small level so that local communities know, well, what does that mean for me? And what does actions I do mean for the community downstream of me? So it has to have kind of a multi-scale aspect to it. We also wanted to predict nitrogen, phosphorus, TSS, DO, chlorophyll A, flow, temp, and tracers, so that this well, to be frank, a model is a pretty expensive and intensive effort, especially if we're trying to make it legally defensible and in the way we are. So this has the applicability of looking at those others parameters that will help us decide on our own TMDLs, our own alternative action plans, and our own more incentive type planning too. We needed it to be an input model for other models, or nested or linked. We're really leaning towards linked because we've developed a third tool, which I'll talk about later, to link to those. HSPF, which we decided to go with, is really versatile, but it's a freshwater model, right? So we needed a way to look at those embayments more effectively. We want to make sure we're simulating actual, of course, but also we're using some of the downscaled climate modeling from IPCC to get some ideas of how well this stands up, how well these potential scenarios stand up. What if we do nothing, worst case scenarios and all that. And then obviously the management scenarios, and then something accessible. So we'll talk about this in a little bit, and we're doing kind of a tiered approach to make it usable in a lot of different ways. So we originally had this HSPF C2M in 2002. And you can see kind of the shaded areas are those of the calibration basins. And we've been able to, through an intensive monitoring effort where we partnered with USGS, but we also used our own data here from DEEP. And a lot of partners when we go into the embayments too, but we can talk about that another time, to really build out, not only in terms of updating temporally, right? We're getting new data, we're doing a longer time span than we did before by a lot to capture different kinds of years. We're also capturing all those other parameters, which we hadn't done in the first round, that expands the model's capability. And we're expanding it geographically as well. We had intended at first, and I may have given you a different map when we first presented, to use these as boundary gauges, but we found that the data was plentiful enough that we could just model the whole area, and it was actually more efficient and more effective to do so. So we've been able to capture some of the non-Connecticut areas as well. So those enhancements, again, huge effort by USGS to help us through that. Denise Argue especially, so many thanks to her. So that said, once we had a plan of how to do the monitoring to support the plan, we started to formulate what this is going to look like in terms of data inputs and what we were going to get out of it. This is a very simplified model to kind of step us through what we plan to put into it and where we plan to get out in terms of water quality aspects at least. So as we started to embark on the data collection, as most models of this magnitude are, it's enormous. And it was a very intense effort to not only gather data, quality assure data, format data so that it went in. And we are incredibly grateful for all our partners. I've mentioned USGS 100 times, and I probably will 100 more times today. But FEMA, our contacts, because they were doing some new flood mapping, and those inputs were in the right format, and were also the same kind of, so that gave us a lot more physical stream characteristics that in detail that we wouldn't have had. CTDOT gives us a lot of HEC-RAS modeling that we were able to pull, very detailed, very local understanding of the stream physical characteristics. USDA and NRCS partnered with us to get a really good understanding of the ag. Long Island Sound Study, thank you for the funding and giving us a review as we've gone through these different steps in the processes. Same with Region 1. ORD, I gotta give a very big shout out to Chris Knights and Finn Cashel, who've been huge in helping us develop the linking tool and what that looks like to link to an embayment model. Rhode Island DEM has been essential in that first partnership, and Yukon through monitoring and land cover data and climate understanding have been wonderful partners as well. And that's just not to mention, even internally, we're working with a lot of different bureaus and a lot of different pieces in Connecticut, but DEEP itself who've been instrumental. So that intensive data collection effort and QA and format was successful. it gave us the ability to know we were going to get quality results, at least on a first level. We hadn't calibrated, of course, to know we could get as granular as what you see in front of you. This has resulted in 1,091 sub watersheds. So that way we could kind of compile, zoom out and do this regional Connecticut holistic look, and then zoom way in as we go to see what all the base and these potential scenarios we'll talk about a little bit could do locally and downstream. Each of those have a reach. And then we have over 100 modeled lakes and impoundments that we think could be won't need a linking model for most cases, but we'll have to take a deeper look to make sure that's true. That we'll be able to evaluate. So after all that compilation, this is kind of the behind the scenes of what that looks like it turned into. So I'm saying the model, but I don't actually mean the model. It's 10 linked models, and these are the kind of the outlines of those 10 linked models and how they fell out. So that's what that looks like. And Respect had mentioned their contracted team here and subcontractors that they've been able to sub as well. That this is one of the most data intensive projects that they've had, and it's led to a pretty big success. Our calibration results are coming in, and we're really pleased with how that's looked. This is one figure, again, huge thank yous to USGS. This is our flow calibration mapping, and this is one of the types of figures we'll see in the final report. We'll also have water quality and whatnot as well. Is a hugely responsible for the success we had with the calibration process. Not only that, the validation process, we could look at the continued data went beyond the calibration period. And then we could also use the USGS groundwater model. And the CDM Smith was really wonderful at preparing a detailed septic inventory, which really helped us refine that. And our new program with withdrawals gave us more data that we were really able to hone in and do a detailed calibration that we're quite pleased with. So as I said, we're starting to get those results, and we're really excited to see we achieved an even higher bar than we set forth in our CRAP. We added another resource, which made our very good a higher bar to achieve. And for the high hydrologic results, we have 83% of our locations are in that top tier, very good calibration. Only 4 sites were in the good, and only 1 site was in the satisfactory. And I neglected to mention this in the data collection too. We also added storm events, so that way we can be sure to look at the impact of stormwater as we go forward too. And with regards to those storm events, we only had 1 site that fell out of that top tier, and it was only in the good category instead of the very good category. So we were really pleased with that. So that said, we're gaining some confidence in how it looks, and we're starting to look at some of those results. So here's a couple sneak peek pictures of what those will look like. Again, we're just starting to get it in ourselves, so we haven't reviewed it. So take that with a grain of salt. But as I go through some of these, if there are particular ways you want to look at the data, that kind of input is really helpful, because, and not only can I help edit the report with regards to that, I can also kind of make sure the outreach materials we do are custom to your needs too. So this is one of the outputs we were looking for, and it's a TSS and turbidity relationship. We were really successful at making a pretty solid relationship to help our water quality team develop TMDLs that were more consistent with our water quality standards and translatable to what we're measuring, right? So in this plot, and all the plots that you'll see going forward, are the observations are in blue and the simulated are in red. And this is just one reach, but these are box plots by month that kind of represent how that played out. I will say the very high end, like some extreme values, we're starting to talk to USGS a little bit more to try and understand that really high end and what that relationship would look like. And if we got more data in that end, if it would change our relationship, or if we could build a secondary one that triggered in. So that's more to come. And these are some examples of the total nitrogen and the ways we're looking at that. We have a time series, again, observations are in blue, simulated is in red, with flow and total nitrogen on our left. Top right is kind of a magnitude and the percentage of time that those total nitrogen values are in those magnitudes. And then the similar box plot by reach by parameter. We're going to have some example reaches because obviously we can't do all 1,091 in the report. And then some statewide values too. And then we'll also do some load maps that you can see shaded by color like you typically see in a lot of these tools. So in parallel with just actual development of the model, you'll see a little video going through here. And this is a demo of the Scenario Application Manager, which we love our acronyms. So we've nicknamed it SAM, or Respect has nicknamed it SAM, and we've adopted that. And this gives us a huge versatile applicability of this tool. We are able to look at changing land cover. What if we're going to improve and reduce impervious surface, adjust septics, add in BMPs like bioretention, and denitrifying ditches, constructed wetlands. You can evaluate cover crops, point sources, and changing flow conditions too, and see what that does. And then all of this you could do as a layered on with changing climatic conditions. You could do your OB situations where, say we do nothing and we develop, and we remove all our wetlands or those kind of scenarios as well, to really get the gravitas of the situation if we did not do anything. So that's one tool that's it's far simpler than running HSPF every time, but it still takes several hours to run a scenario depending on what you have. And you can also evaluate these changes in your area, but then see the impact downstream, which we think is really powerful. So the third tool we've developed in parallel is the WQ modeling, right? Water quality modeling. And this is that framework I was talking about earlier, where we're using the land loading and the freshwater loads to feed into these other models. Like I said, I hope I said, HSPF is a freshwater model and a land loading model, not a tidal model. So when we want to do these closer look at the embayments, like we set out in our strategy, we need a way to link that to another model. So this tool takes a GIS input file and with your new delineations for that particular model, and it repopulates the HSPF output and in terms of this linked models needed input, right? Right now you're seeing a WASP example because that's the most experience, and why Chris Knights and Finn Cashel have been hugely helpful. One of the most newest developments on this is we're not only doing the HSPF outputs, we're also doing those in-between pieces that HSPF doesn't need as an input, but it's not necessarily an output. It's calculating it along the way. So that way we have this consistent framework, and we're modeling apples to apples across Connecticut. That will be exported and made into a linking model output as well. And then we have some of our inputs to HSPF, not just the outputs that are required as inputs to these models too. So that we actually just had a presentation on that yesterday and what the 1D version of that test example looks like. And some of those results are pretty exciting too. And that Finn actually has a paper out we can share with people too. Oop, I went too fast, sorry about that. So our next steps, right? And this is adapting based on feedback we get as we start to talk about how we can do this and what we can do. Outreach, We're reviewing the results and preparing the report to bring to the table. So we have something to bring to the table, but we're also having conversations preliminary with a lot of you. If we haven't talked to you already, I will probably be bugging you soon, about what kind of materials you want us to bring to the table for this co-creation workshop and what we can do. And then when we do this co-creation workshop, listen to the priorities and the needs that you have going on. And maybe they're climate resilient, and it's a definitely, we're gonna do a base run with the climate and see what that impact is and start from there. Or maybe you have other priorities for nature-based solutions, right? And we can take those priorities and those co-benefits for other potential missions and see what this water quality benefit is by putting it into these and building these together. So in this kind of pre-conversations too, I've also started to realize that while SAM is super simplified compared to an HSPF model, it's not instantaneous. And you do still need some understanding of what's built into the model to know what your limits of what you can put in are. And hearing that, we're also going to be developing a very simplified story map that's interactive so that it can fit the format of your town hall meeting or your watershed meeting and not have to run for hours and then get back to people. And then the input we get at those co-creation workshops, that'll define what that looks like. So that way it's most usable for you right away. We're hoping that not only feeds that exact product, it helps us reevaluate our own programming and our own planning to making sure we're moving forward with local priorities. And then we really hope that this is useful for you. It's a legally robust tool that shows your impacts and impacts downstream, that can go in to make a project competitive for grant funding and legally defensible in your town hall meetings and easily understandable well, with the materials we can provide you as support from these. And then also inform our next steps with our linking models. Oh, thanks, Sarah. This is my last one, so I'll just and the linking models again is that framework for the whole state. We've already kind of done a schematic of what this kind of scheme looks like with the linking to HSPF and then did some planning on how complex different embayments are across the coast with a team from Yukon support. Craig Tobias was hugely helpful, Jamie Vaudry, Jim O'Donnell. They gave us some great input on that. And then we did a specific data evaluation for 2As, and they gave us some recommendations for those so that we could see how that scheme would play out when we tried to implement it. And then since then, we've been able to contract to develop the models for 4 priority embayments you see here. And that will be underway in 2025. So if you are as excited about this as we are, we hope you join us for these co-creation workshops. And and a huge thank you to all of our partners, SRC and Long Island Sound Study, for funding support.
Awesome, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That was a great overview. And we look forward to helping get the word out about those workshops, when the time is right in the near future. So a reminder to everyone to stick any questions that you have for Kate in the chat. I know there was one earlier about water quality standards and criteria and whether or not Connecticut had adopted them. And Kelly, mentioned that they're going to be using models to develop those criteria. But if they're welcome any other thoughts you might have on that, Kate, or if there are other questions from folks, please do go ahead and put that in the chat. And I'll note that all of you can probably see Kate was our final speaker. We are a little ahead of schedule. So if there are questions too, for any of the other speakers, we've got a couple of minutes for that before we move into kind of final wrap up and information sharing from our team. And I see a comment or a question from Kate about the original model plan was to include biointegrity outcomes for aquatic life use support in stream segments throughout Connecticut. Is that a part of the model or is that no longer a part of the model?
No longer, I think. So so we have intent to do some eelgrass work with the outcomes of these. I think Paul's thinking bigger picture, but the model, so there's so not eliminated, but not, it's phase work, I guess.
Elizabeth's gonna stick the slides back up for us. Like I said, if any final questions come to mind for anyone, please do stick that in the chat. Oh, the slides were there and now they're gone. I'll give everyone a preview. We are going to have a couple final polls and then some information on how you can provide feedback to us. If you were here at the outset, you probably remember me saying, you know, when we close out today, there will be a little pop-up in your web browser that comes up with just a short feedback form. We'd really appreciate you taking a few minutes to fill out and tell us, give us some feedback about today. But first we're gonna quickly look at all of Kate's awesome slides one more time. Love them. And now our final poll questions for all of you is we'd like to know to what extent, you know, all the things that you learned today, are you walking away with new knowledge that's going to help you with community resilience planning? We're hoping that, you know, folks found this really helpful and you'll be able to use one or more of these tools in your work. Maybe you still need some more information. Hopefully everyone learned something today. And we look, as I said before, a couple times throughout the presentation today, you know, we'll look forward to following up on these tools with all of you and sharing opportunities to learn more about them. It's a little bit longer to decide on your answer. And while you're thinking, I'm going to give you a preview of the next question, which is, you know, I feel like we jammed a lot of really great information on, you know, 3 or 4 tools into our 2 hours together here today. But are there any other resilience tools that you know of that you'd like to learn more about, or, you know, you still have a need for some sort of tool that you would like to see filled? We'd like to hear that in the next slide, which if you can click over to that, Elizabeth. This is another kind of free response opportunity to let us know if there are any other tools you'd like to learn about. And while you're doing that, I'm just going to take a minute here to just say thank you again to all of our guest speakers today, Robin, Enrico, Caitlin, Mike, and Kathleen. Really great presentations from all of you. I know I learned a lot. I appreciate everyone on this call tuning in. We do have one more workshop session for our 3rd annual workshop tomorrow at 10 a.m. On planning for inundation and hearing from some communities and agencies that are considering buyout programs and other options for potentially, you know, relocation and community resilience. So we hope to see you there. Still time to register if you haven't already. And like I said before, please know when you log off today, you know, that feedback form is going to pop up and we appreciate you telling us what you think. I think we're actually going to stick a link to that in the chat as well, just in case. And just really appreciate everyone being here and your feedback because it helps us develop our future workshops and programs. So I'm going to leave this up here just for a minute or two for any final comments or thoughts in the chat. But thank you again. And we really hope everyone has a great rest of your afternoon. And hopefully we will see you tomorrow. And I'm going to just take a look at what people are saying about tools. Fantastic. Any tools focused on heat? Okay, yeah, along with water-based. Good to know. Preparing assessment, restoration. Fantastic. I think you can still put those responses in and our team will review them. But again, thanks so much. Here's a link to our Resilience Resource Hub. And we look forward to seeing you all again real soon. Take care.